some of the principles of transformational leadership that you saw? Any of the 4 I's in what he talked about?
Intellectual stimulation for sure.
How did you see that?
I mean, his total redesign of the school to be based on wisdom, whether you think it's good or bad, he's still trying to re-innovate it, make it different. At least he's trying something new.
Yeah. He leaves space for there to be creativity and innovation. Both in his workplace, I think there's spaces where he's done that, as well as in the education system that are kind of these private schools that they started. What else did you see?
I think there was also like that idea of intellectual stimulation within the workplace because he allowed his employees to go do things they enjoy, it got them excited about their lives and what they're doing and what they're working on. So I think because of when you're doing things you enjoy, then you most likely are having a better attitude, and that can be reflected in the workplace.
Absolutely. How many of y'all, what does it take for you to be creative and innovative? Does it happen when you're focusing on a task, or does it happen when you're daydreaming and thinking about stuff? When are you most creative?
When I don't have constraints, or pressure to do something. I'm saying there are rules and boundaries for a reason in this world, but I don't know, I really love his approach to schooling because I don't know, just this semester, with your class and everything, we're jumping through hoops for what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many of y'all are you come up with some of your best ideas in the shower? Anybody? Just me, right? I think I told this to Erin early on. I was I will have lesson plans to share with you weeks in advance because I do lesson plans. I have a teacher background. But I was also don't be surprised if we get ready to come to class and I've switched something up. And she's what? And I was yeah, sometimes it'll be 5:30 in the morning and I'm taking a shower and I'm oh, we should do this differently today. And I just kind of change. There's something about having nothing else going on that my brain finally has time to think, right? And so I do think, and again, there's, we could hash out pluses and minuses to their company policy, positives and negatives to it, but there is this idea of when you allow people leisure time, you're also giving them space to be creative and to think and to innovate. If you're only focused on production, again, you kind of get in that set of, I'm just making widgets and I'm going to keep making the widgets the way they always are. You don't really have time to think.
Are the schools working?
Mm-hmm.
Is there case studies on it?
There are. And so he mentioned here, so this was filmed back in 2014. They're still private because they can't get people to adopt it for free. They've said, we will help train. If we want to shift what public education looks like in Brazil, we will help train, we will help implement, and they just won't adopt it. And he mentioned their scores of their students is this idea of allowing students to learn with their developmental stages. And they're still achieving outcomes. They still have outcomes, things that, like you said, by the time they're 17, we want everybody to be able to know these things. But students are kind of learning at their pace. It's a lot more, they have more tutors. So rather than having a class of 30, you kind of have a little bit more 1-on-5 instruction. Students are shifting and their scores are higher than the average public schools in Brazil.
So this is only in Brazil?
Mm-hmm.
So that can move to
Yeah. It's definitely a difference, and not to get too much in education theory, but it's much more constructivist thinking as far as letting students learn and create learning together than the behaviorist thinking that, again, we've learned about behavior theory and here with motivation. I'm going to reinforce. If I just teach you this way, you're going to do what if I want you to have this answer, I'm going to reward you for this answer. Very behaviorist approach to education. We're still functioning very much in a behaviorist approach to education. That has probably been the most influential piece of American education since the early 1900s. That's how we were created, it's with that approach. So it's a very different perspective.
So which one do you think is better?
I tend to rely more on constructivists. But it's hard in our system. So as a teacher, I may ascribe more to a constructivist theory of education, but I'm in an environment that doesn't work. I'm almost in some ways forced. Like, I'll tell y'all right now, if it were up to me, I wouldn't give grades. I do not like grading. I don't think it causes y'all to be motivated for the right things. I think it causes you to be motivated for a grade and to check boxes rather than to actually learn. And there's different ways to go about assessment than just that way. But I couldn't not give y'all grades, because what do y'all need grades for in our system? You need a GPA. You need a GPA to graduate. Do you see what I mean? Like, so even if there just has to be a bigger organizational shift, structural shift, in order for some.
About the student page, we'll get a little taste of how it all works, because it's a lot.
Yeah, it's tough.
I think that definitely makes sense, like, systematically, because I can think back, like, don't ask me if I retained any of the information from 2 years ago, because my brain, like, the way education is, like, in our country, it's like, my brain is trained to, like, retain and remember information up to the exam, and then after that, it's like, whoosh, it's gone. Like, I probably couldn't tell you. But anyway, this reminded me of, like, what Google has done, like, with their, like, job site. Like, they have lots of, like, you pretty much, like, create your own schedule, and they have all of, like, the fun leisure things. Like, you want to go play basketball for the day, like, you can do that, and it, like, sparks creativity. And that's, like, it's made Google super successful.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to do that with money, though.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Well, even, that's the one thing that I don't always like about these TED Talks is you have these really inspiring ideas from people that have that leisure time and money. When you look at the average person, that's the biggest stressor, that's the biggest cause for divorce and for family situations is that salary money aspect. And when every company doesn't offer the same opportunity, it's hard to continue that idea of innovation. So it's almost not like a realistic idea that it's great that it's working for those 3 schools. Good for them. What is everybody else going to do?
Right. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. So that is one criticism I have. As you can definitely tell, he comes from a privileged stance. I mean, even him just talking about his empty bucket list by the age of 50, I'm like, I would love to do that stuff too, but I still got bills to pay, right? Like, doesn't get rid of that standpoint. So there is some of that we do have to look at and be mindful of. And, you know, that gets us even more into some of those systematic issues that, again, all these things are interconnected, right? Like, we can't just look at how to fix education or how to fix business without understanding that the two influence each other. Or we can't look at those without thinking about how other societal structures influence people's ability to engage or not engage in those systems at an equitable level, right? And so starting to get on that idea of process, that again, these issues are a little bit more complex than what we want them to be, right? But there's some nuggets we can take out of it, right? It's like eating a chicken leg. You're going to eat the meat and throw out the bone, okay? A little bit of everything. There's some meat to eat, and then there's some bones to throw away. You like that analogy?
No, it's funny because I don't know, because I guess like now from hearing that perspective, like I'm just like reflecting on my own life a little bit, and like I'm very blessed to like have parents who like pay for my school, so like I have no debt. Like I'm very, very privileged in that sense, and it's just interesting.
Yeah. On the inspirational motivation piece, do y'all consider him to be inspiring and motivational? Just from listening to him?
Not really.
Not really. He wasn't that charismatic, was he? So he's kind of a good example of like, you could probably look in his organization and see how there's some inspirational motivation, but we're not solely relying on him for that. We're not tied to that idea of charisma so much. Did y'all see transactional leadership at all? So I'll admit, not everything he talked about was transformational. Some of his company policies or things they did were more transactional, contingent reward, management by exception.
Like the whole, you can have your Wednesday back for 10%. I don't know.
Yeah, you can have your Wednesday, but we're going to lower your salary by 10%.
If you sell X amount of widgets,
Yeah, so you get rewarded if, so we see that idea of you can get this if, contingent reward. How do y'all feel about that idea of like, would you like to have one, for 10% less of your salary, would you work one day less?
Absolutely not.
No?
I don't think that's, I think tagging along with what Bobby was talking about earlier, like, these ideas are great and all, but then you have to like close the TED Talk and like look at reality. And that's like a dude who's like loaded telling us that,
Yeah. But that's for his whole company though too. So I mean, any employee could do it.
The sales industry overall, that's almost what it is for a lot of companies. They set like a goal, like you have to have 20 meetings throughout the week. You get your 20 meetings done Monday through Wednesday. It's all goal-oriented based, and if you want to work more, that's great, then you get an extra bonus. And I think that's a lot of what the sales industry is doing.
I think it's interesting that it's saying, if you want to do baseline. And I think, you could say from a mental health aspect, there's some benefits to it. But if you're a person that you're like, no, I want to work extra, you still have the opportunity. It's not stopping you from doing it.
I also think like how they do vacation days, like if that's how you do it, I take a Wednesday off.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite thing that my mom does.
Yeah.
She comes up on another day, she's like, sorry, I'm using my voice. She's like, I got a vacation day. I'm gonna come up on a Tuesday and see you. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I think if you have kids or anything and have that opportunity, you'd absolutely take that. Or if you have family far away, you're just like, oh, I have a day, I'll go take it. I take 10% off.
I think it totally is contingent on your stage of life. I think when I first started working, and even when I was first married, I don't think I would have ever thought about that. But now I'd be like, we could adjust our budget 10% for me to have one day to do whatever I wanted or what have you. Still went home, still put my kid in school, but it might be nice.
But I think it also like goes back to like this whole idea of like financial literacy and like how people handle money and like how easy consumer debt is for just the average Joe. So it's like, I don't know, selling your soul almost, and then it's like you're promising your life away to this job so you can pay for these material things. I think it just depends on like how you're raised and like, I don't know.
Yeah. What did y'all think about their approach to a board for his company?
I loved that. That was awesome.
Yeah.
I really like how the subordinates interview the potential leader, because I think that's something that's so important. Like, I'm looking for a company on campus, and I was in charge of taking applications from the database and putting them into a Google Drive so that they can look at it through the interview. I got to look over the applications, and he didn't necessarily ask for my feedback, but I was like, oh, this one like had a really cool resume or something like that, and it just made me feel part of the process. So I don't really know the person, but I still feel like I know them. But if I got a chance to like be a part of that interview process, it's gonna obviously make that subordinate to higher leader management role relationship better.
Well, and think about if you're the person being hired and you're being hired by your subordinates, you feel more accountability to them then, right? Like, you're like, oh my gosh, they chose me, right? And so I think that that's a great way to start off that type of relationship in the workplace too. And, you could tell, and I think this was part of his inspirational motivation, is empowering the people that worked for him. So, that was one way, allowing subordinates to interview and also evaluate every 6 months, but also leaving open seats on the board for anyone who showed up first. That was a way to empower the people that worked for him. And then he did that again in the education setting. I don't know if y'all have ever been a part of that, but, anytime in a class of mine, or if I've done a workshop and I've said, okay, let's set the ground rules. Y'all tell me, what are the rules for the semester? Never once have students come up with a list of rules that I wouldn't have created myself. And he talked about that with students. Oh, you think it's okay to hit each other on the head? Go for it. Y'all are going to come back in a week and create a rule that says we shouldn't hit each other on the head. So but what's the difference between allowing other people to establish rules for themselves rather than you imposing rules on them? What's the difference?
I think just like allowing people to be involved in the decision-making process, like it creates like better engagement. Because if you kind of establish like, I'm your authority, here are the rules, then there's like this weird hierarchy thing. But if you allow people to be involved in what's going on, it kind of has a different mindset overall.
Yeah. So, and it's this idea of mutual accountability that ends up happening that empowers. So in our Ag Leadership Professional Development class, that course is mainly a teams-based class. And one aspect of it that a lot of students say is the hardest, but also the best thing they've ever learned is in their teams, they have to come up with a team contract. So how many meetings are people allowed to miss with the team? What is everyone expected to contribute? All these, a legit contract, and they all sign it. And they're accountable for holding each other up to it. And if someone isn't pulling their own weight, they can fire each other. That person gets kicked off the team. And if they don't get picked up by another team, they have to like interview and be a part of another, if they fail the class. And people will say, this was really hard to do, but also more people follow the contract because they got to be a part of creating the contract. And they said, well, yeah, we did decide this all together. This wasn't something that Dr. Weeks just said we had to do. We decided our contract. So some teams are okay if you miss 5 times. Some teams say you can miss no meetings. Every team's a little different, but it's mutual accountability. And that's part of transformational leadership too, is creating that environment where that can happen. Any other thoughts on the TED Talk? Good example, bad example of transformational leadership?
I feel like it's been the most engaging we've all been.
Yeah, y'all try that a lot. It's thought-provoking. And again, there's some things that are there that I'm like, oh, I just don't know if that works in reality. But it's nice to have space to think about something different and to think about the fact that things can be done differently, right? So we will pick up on Thursday with authentic leadership, but in the meantime, because we're now done with ethics and transformational leadership, y'all have a quiz that's open now. Make sure you take it before we come to class on Thursday. Okay, so it should be available on Canvas. See y'all then.